So, there's so much we could say about this time of Thanksgiving, you know? We had a nice Thanksgiving, and my mother-in-law was with us this week, which I am thankful for. I want to put it out there. I'm going to say for the record. It was very positive, and it was really lovely that she was with us this year. And holidays have been kind of tricky because of loss and family and not having much family. So sometimes it's a little bit challenging, you know, to have a Thanksgiving and all of these pictures where over the years and living in different cities, we've always had more of a friends kind of Thanksgiving rather than with lots of family. Family was in New York, and a lot of them didn't talk to each other and all of those kinds of things. But this Thanksgiving, I was really had lots of gratitude. There was really some wonderful things. One thing I'm grateful for is that most weeks there's a cantoral soloist. And I'm always happy when she goes and takes time away, and Holly is out on the East Coast watching over her sons, which you know is a great sense of joy and satisfaction for her. So she's somewhere on the East Coast with both of her sons for some part of Thanksgiving. That's really lovely. And we're happy for her mostly. But then there's these other things about Thanksgiving that has been occurring to me. One is a sense of memory, because Jews are really focused on memory. One thing is that I learned from as a kid is that we forget nothing, right? Most of the folks in my family, you know, you would say that, you know, they will forgive but never forget. That doesn't sound like forgiving to me, right? There's a sense of remembering. There's a sense of remembering and focusing in that I think is really wonderful, but it also has this opportunity to hold on to all of these grudges. But as a child, Thanksgiving was kind of sweet. There was that fancy table, and I wasn't always a vegetarian. Before I was 12, I actually ate turkey. And there was this kind of powerful thing that there was kind of white flags out, and everybody kind of got along. And Thanksgiving was that special kind of time. And I remember being young, really young, a child, and having a sense of what was important and a sense of gratitude. And gratitude, like I've told you often, to me, is much more than saying thank you. Thank you is just like the peripheral part of it. It's important, but there's so much more that goes into gratitude before and after that thank you. But this idea of remembering and gratitude mixed with what's happening in the Jewish world and how we, even in Boulder, and we've been talking about this past month, have been touched with aspects of anti-Semitism, whether it's a little bit of that fear about the synagogue and the plans against it in Pueblo, or even on Pearl Street Mall, where people in our congregation are using really colorful terms to talk about who those folks were in the evening on some evening on Pearl Street Mall on a Friday or Saturday night, handing out literature about how the Holocaust didn't happen and the Jews were responsible for 9/11 and all of these terrible things with their words. Just atrocious. And I think about memory. Again, lizkor, to remember, is from the root of zachar, which is to focus in on something. It's not just to have a memory, but it's to focus our attention. So then I'm thinking about memory in the Jewish community and how at the end of every minyan we say Kaddish and we remember. We have perpetual yard sites. Folks want to remember forever. As long as the synagogue is standing, we're going to read the names that are on those plaques, and when it's their week or on Yizkor, we'll turn the lights on as just another act of remembering. We have times where we remember hardship and great joy, whether it's celebrations like Purim or sadness of Tisha B'Av and Yom HaShoah. So I'm thinking gratitude and remembering and family and how we feel as Jews and these foolish statements on Pearl Street filled with anti-Semitic rhetoric. And then I think about Thanksgiving. And we weren't told the truth. That pilgrim story, it's a little more complicated than that. And if anybody was to say that the Holocaust didn't happen, or if our historical traumas didn't happen, we would be up in arms, and we'd be calling out names, and we'd be calling the police, even though we also fiercely protect the freedom of speech. We'd be calling anybody we can to say that there are people who are not just remembering wrong, but are creating their own facts. And we need to set the record straight, because you cannot deny us our suffering. And yet, I believe in the power of this American holiday of Thanksgiving, but its origins are not true. And it brings a little bit of shame, and we don't really talk about it. People who are a little bit younger than me, I think, talk out a lot more than my peers, my contemporaries, a little younger, a little older. But to colonize was not consensual. When Europeans came to this land thinking that they discovered it the way I learned in elementary school, well, it wasn't true. There was a whole vast civilization was here, not quite up to the standards to the European Christians who made it. But there has to be some truth-telling, and I think it's not because I want to break myths, and it's not because I want to get angry, but I think that we can have a greater sense of gratitude if we understood where we're getting it from, and perhaps what was some of the costs. Because what I've often shared is that gratitude isn't saying thank you. It is having a sense of appreciation that wants to change myself. It's a moment of transformation that I want to do more and be more and grow more and give more. Give more. We're not really honest if we say we're grateful and then if we're not giving. So how do we recognize this disconnect? Well, I've been reading some things from David Silverman because he's coming out with a new book. He's a historian. He's at George Washington University, and he wrote something in The Atlantic recently. He wrote in the New York Times recently, and he talks about this repression of other peoples, most particularly Native American peoples, and he points out when we talk about Native Americans and we talk about the American Indian, we never really mention their tribes. We're not even familiar with them, except that we drive on Arapaho. Or that the towns around where I grew up all had Indian, Native American names, but nobody told me the tribes. Nobody told me the names of those people. We as Jews would never tolerate such a thing. And it's only recently that I'm even understanding that. Only recently. So I know it's difficult, but sometimes we have to look at other stories. And before we talk a little bit about that Native American story, I want to tell you about a text. There's a midrash on the Psalms, and it's from the 10th century in the land of Israel. And in this midrash, it's called Midrash Tehillim, which is the word for Psalms. So in this midrash, it says, Rabbi Yanai said, the Torah was not given in a clear-cut manner. We all know that already. The Torah was not given in a clear-cut manner. Rather, on every statement that God said to Moses, God would say 49 reasons. Literally, the word was panim, faces. 49 faces. 49 reasons why any particular matter could be pure. Don't worry about the idea of pure or impure. In the ancient world, ritual purity was important for everything, not just sacrifice, but even the vessels that we would cook with. So they focused a lot on purity. But don't take it so literally. So again, it says, the Torah was not given in a clear-cut manner. Rather, on every statement that God said to Moses, God would say 49 reasons the matter could be pure, and 49 reasons why the matter could be impure. Moses said to God, Master of the universe, when will we know the truth? When are you going to clarify this for us? How are we going to understand the matter? And God said to Moses, go according to the majority. If the majority rules it's impure, it's impure. The majority rules it's pure, it's pure. It's kind of interesting to me because A, God doesn't tell us the right answer. You would think God wants us to do it right. Rather, God says, it's okay if you miss it, go with the majority. So that's an interesting piece. But the part that I want to share with you is, for every argument And arguments are precious in Jewish tradition, not just because we like to argue, but because in all of our texts we have dissenting opinions. We have another position, another thought. And so when the rabbis say you need 49 arguments for and 49 arguments against, and then you're going to make up your mind. We, in 2019, we don't want to hear anybody's arguments except our own. And we're going to live in our own echo chamber. And we're not going to really tolerate a difference of opinion. And yet the rabbis are saying, listen, think about the alternatives. And that text is coming to me because I think for so often, we don't want to hear some of these truths. We'd rather keep the myth and have our kids dress up as pilgrims. Why would I want my kid dressing up as a pilgrim? They didn't love Jews so much either. But that's okay. Sometimes we have to understand truths, and sometimes there are conflicting truths. We remember the English pilgrims. They cram aboard this Mayflower and cross the Atlantic to seek religious freedom in America. They are our heroes, landing at Plymouth Rock, ready to build this new colony. And like in the New World, it's hard. And the American Indian, again, never mentioning their names, tribal names, the American Indian in the myth helps these new colonists to plant corn and develop their resources so that they can be self-sufficient. And in gratitude, they create this pact and celebrate the first Thanksgiving. Well, according to Dr. Silverman, writing the other day, and the article is called The Vicious Reality Behind the Thanksgiving Myth, he says the Wampanoags, I think I got it right, that's the name of the tribe. The Indians in this tale have long contended that the Thanksgiving myth sugarcoats the viciousness of colonial history for Native people. The Pilgrims didn't enter an empty wilderness ripe for the taking. Human civilization in the Americas was every bit as ancient and rich as Europe. That is why the Wampanoag country was full of villages, roads, and cornfields, monuments, cemeteries, and forests cleared of underbrush. Generations of Native people had made it that way with the expectation of passing it along, that land, to their descendants. Contrary to this Thanksgiving myth, this pilgrim Wampanoag encounter was no first contact meeting. It followed a string of bloody episodes since 1524, in which European explorers seized coastal Wampanoags to be sold into overseas slavery or to be trained as interpreters or guides. The Wampanoags reached out to the Pilgrims not only despite this violent history, but also partly because of it. Why? Because they faced a threat. As the Europeans were coming, so they brought disease too. The folks became vulnerable, and a neighboring tribe wanted to overtake them. They wanted access to the Europeans' weapons, and they wanted an alliance to fight off this new neighboring enemy, and so they made a pact with their own aggressor in order to survive. And that pact fell apart, and European colonists ravaged the land with expansion, murder, and enslavement. As Jews, and as Jews who have achieved some standing, power, influence, we would not tolerate such misguided history lessons, whitewashing. What happened to us in years past in Germany, in Europe, in America, or Egypt? We wouldn't tolerate such myths being told against us. So Dr. Silverman, he continued at the end of this article, he says, the challenges are undoubtedly stark. The Native American past and present tend to make white people uncomfortable because they turn patriotic histories and heroes inside out and loosen claims on morality, authority, and justice. That's why I gave the 49 reasons, to hear the other side. They threaten to tear down monuments and rename buildings, but confronting the dark history of colonialism in Indian country also promises to shed light, to cultivate national humility, and most important, signal to Native people that the country values them. Those are the same things that we have always wanted too. So one more message. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who's the head of the Reform Movement, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, he said that corrected history doesn't undermine a favorite holiday, but rather helps us to rebuild it on a more truthful foundation. That is, I think, our job. Here are the 49 and the 49. Let's find truths. Let's try and uncover them, not to rob ourselves and deny ourselves of our Thanksgiving celebrations or meals or anything like that, but to try and make them honest, because then maybe they'll be richer. Maybe we can shine a greater light about them. Maybe we can be honest in our remembering, which is so important to the Jewish soul, to remember. So I'm going to try and remember, and I'm going to express a little gratitude. One thing that I've been learning this past year, after really not understanding it all, is that folks talk about land acknowledgements. Universities are beginning to do it. Reformed synagogues in Canada are doing it regularly. And I've never done such a thing before, and I think we have to craft something about where we came from. But a little attempt to express some gratitude and to share a truth is to recognize that the synagogue, this synagogue, sits upon land within the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, and to acknowledge that there are 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. Our synagogue was founded as an institution to grow our spirits and recognize the divine presence of others, including those beyond the Jewish community, and to strengthen our Jewish identity. So as we do so, we can recognize that the country and the city's development came at a cost to Native peoples. To acknowledge this is to advance the value of inclusion and justice that we cherish, and we do cherish them. So as we recognize wrongs committed even in this region, and we remember wrongs committed against our own people, we can sympathize and empathize with people who feel exiled from their own land. We can listen and hear their story. So, last week after services, when I wished everybody a happy Thanksgiving, somebody asked, "What do you do about this?" So my answer is, tell the truth, learn the story, lift up other people, and then express some gratitude. I'm still going to observe our Thanksgiving in our authentic way, and our vegetarian Thanksgiving table is still going to have lentils. I don't know why, but we do. But that's our thing now. So whatever it is that you do or not, I hope that there is a moment of gratitude. And part of that is to remember where our stories come from and where our neighbors' stories come from. Let's conclude. 500